Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take the source material you're curious about and extract the knowledge you need quickly and thoroughly.
Today we're diving into a YouTube overview of a German book, DevOps mit AWS. DevOps with AWS from 2023.
Right. And this book, well, the overview of it anyway, seems aimed at anyone trying to get their head around cloud stuff, specifically AWS, and how DevOps fits in. Practical examples seem key here.
Exactly. So our mission today is basically to pull out the most important bits, really interesting takeaways from that YouTube summary.
Yeah, save you the effort of watching the whole thing, but still give you a solid understanding of what this book, via the review, covers, especially that DevOps and AWS connection.
Okay, so where did the overview start? Looks like it begins right where the book does, explaining AWS itself. Yeah, it lays the groundwork, what AWS is, how it's structured internally. But interestingly, right off the bat, there's a point of discussion.
Oh.
The author apparently starts with the classic three service models: IaaS, PaaS, SaaS, infrastructure, platform, software as a service.
Okay, yeah, the familiar ones. But the YouTube presenter pushes back on that a bit.
They do. They argue it's, well, an oversimplification these days.
Right, because the cloud isn't just those three big buckets anymore, is it? For you listening, think about it. It's gotten way more granular.
Exactly. The presenter actually lists more models like service database, service function, even service AI.
Wow, okay.
And they make the point that service as a model itself is a thing now. It just shows how specialized things have become.
And there's that trend towards serverless, too, right? The overview mentions that.
Absolutely.
Right.
Traditional services increasingly getting serverless options.
It's like the underlying infrastructure just kind of fades away more and more. You're just using the service.
That's a good way to put it. The focus shifts from managing the nuts and bolts to just consuming the capability.
So for a developer maybe used to racking servers, what's the big mental shift needed then?
Well, it's really about letting go of managing the underlying OS or the hardware capacity planning. You trust the cloud provider for that.
And focus purely on the code and the application logic.
Pretty much. Building value rather than managing infrastructure plumbing.
Okay. But despite that initial critique about the service models, the presenter seems quite positive about AWS overall.
Oh, very much so. The overview really highlights strong agreement with the author calling AWS the best of its kind.
High praise.
Yeah, genuine admiration for the creators, the ingenuity involved. It acknowledges AWS's position.
Okay, moving on. The overview then brings up AWS Lambda, familiar service.
Right, but not just standard Lambda. The book apparently talks about its evolution, specifically something the transcript calls Lambda H.
Lambda H, is that Lambda at edge?
That seems the most likely interpretation, yeah.
Edge.
Lambda at edge, and the distinction is pretty important for performance.
Okay, so refresh us, Lambda at edge, how's it different?
Well, the key is where the code runs. Regular Lambda executes in whatever AWS region the developer picks, right?
Right, your main region.
But Lambda at edge runs the functions much closer to the end user, out in their region or even their specific zone, at the content delivery network edge location.
Ah, okay, so it's like having a little compute instance right near the customer accessing the app.
Exactly, instead of the request having to travel all the way back to your main region.
Got it. So regular Lambda runs closer to the developer's core setup. Lambda at edge runs closer to the customer. Big performance win for geographically spread users.
Precisely. Lower latency, better user experience.
Yeah.
The presenter apparently makes that distinction clear, which is good. Sometimes helps with data residency rules too.
Makes sense. Now, the overview also mentions that AWS isn't just tools, but also guidance.
Yeah, the well-architected framework. The book highlights this.
So best practices from AWS itself on how to build well on their platform.
Essentially, yes. Guidance for security, performance, resilience, cost efficiency. It's about building well, not just building.
Okay. And since the book is DevOps mit AWS, naturally it defines DevOps. How does it frame it?
It describes it as that classic integration between development, dev, and operations, ops.
Not just tools, but a culture, a set of practices.
Exactly. Fostering collaboration, streamlining the whole software lifecycle.
And it's presented as a cycle, right?
Yes, a continuous loop. Plan, implement, test, release, deploy, operate, monitor.
And then feed the monitoring insights back into planning, that feedback loop.
Crucial part. Constant improvement.
The presenter notes the book compares DevOps to Agile.
It does, drawing parallels with the iterative nature. But the presenter spotted something missing.
What's that?
No comparison to extreme programming, XP.
Interesting. XP has a lot of strong technical practices you'd think that would connect well with the ops side automation in DevOps.
Yeah, seems like a potentially relevant comparison that wasn't made, at least according to the overview.
Okay, so within this DevOps world, what's the DevOps engineer actually doing, according to the book?
A key thing is writing infrastructure code.
Mm-hmm.
Infrastructure as code, IAC.
Ah, the core concept. Defining your servers, networks, everything in code instead of clicking buttons.
Precisely. And the book apparently dedicates quite a bit of space to this, starting around page 50.
And it breaks IAC down.
Into 4 types, according to the overview. Simple scripting, configuration provisioning tools, containerization like Docker, and templating languages.
Templating like CloudFormation or Terraform.
Exactly. And Terraform gets a specific mention in the overview as a key tool discussed. It's that blueprint idea for your infrastructure.
Okay, but then the presenter notes something a bit odd about how the book handles IAC.
Yeah, this is curious. The presenter observes that the same 4 types of IAC and similar tools get discussed again in detail in Chapter 6.
Chapter 6 is entirely about IAC.
Apparently so.
Yeah.
And it uses different terminology, a slightly different theoretical angle.
Huh. So you get IAC explained in Chapter 2 and then explained again differently in Chapter 6.
That's the impression from the overview. The presenter even suggests, kind of helpfully, that if you don't grasp it in Chapter 2, Chapter 6 might offer a different way in.
Like 2 different explanations of the same thing. Maybe helpful, maybe bit repetitive.
Could be either, depending on the reader, I suppose. But the core message is clear. IAC is about automation, consistency, repeatability.
Treating infrastructure like code,
Yeah.
version control, testing, all that good stuff.
Exactly. For you, the listener, that means more reliable systems, less manual error.
Makes sense. The overview then talks about automation more broadly.
Yes, it's a major theme. Automation in general, but also specifically the automation of testing.
Crucial for DevOps and CI/CD.
Absolutely. And the presenter finds this focus so important, they actually recommend the book beyond just developers,
Who else?
to employers, business owners, HR folks, and software companies,
Right, them.
to help them understand how development and testing are intertwined, how automation impacts skills needed, hiring, team structure, getting that alignment right.
That's a great point. Okay, flowing from automation, we get to CI/CD, continuous integration, continuous delivery.
Yep, another cornerstone, presented as crucial for modern teams, automating the build, test, deploy cycle.
Faster feedback, faster releases.
That's the goal. And the book apparently highlights the AWS tools for this.
Like
Code commit for Git repos, code build for building, code artifact or packages, code deploy for deployments, and code pipeline to orchestrate it all.
the whole tool chain.
Right. And the overview mentions an example of integrating with other platforms too,
Oh, yeah.
specifically the AWS connector for GitHub, showing that AWS plays nice with other popular tools. You're not locked into only AWS services for your whole workflow.
That's important. Now, the overview suggests the book also tries to address developer concerns.
Yes, it seems to actively tackle misconceptions or fears about DevOps and automation.
Like what?
Well, one warning from the author is apparently against excessive automation. Don't get carried away.
Okay.
The point being that humans, manual checks, manual testing, still have a place. It's about balance.
Find the right things to automate. Don't just automate for automation's sake.
Exactly. And another point is about automation freeing up developer time.
Does it?
The book argues not necessarily, or rather, the free time gets filled by tackling more complex automation and problems that the sophisticated tools now enable.
Ah, so the nature of the work shifts upwards in complexity rather than disappearing.
That seems to be the idea, which leads to the point about jobs.
Right, the fear of automation leading to unemployment.
The book's view, relayed by the presenter, is optimistic. It doesn't have to lead to unemployment if managed smartly. Skills evolve, focus shifts to higher-level tasks.
Requires adaptation, though, both from individuals and businesses.
Definitely. The overview also touches on other tools and architectures briefly.
Oh.
Mentions Pulumi as another IAC option, showing awareness of the broader landscape beyond just AWS tools.
And architectures.
Discusses monolithic versus modular versus microservices. Provides context for applying DevOps and AWS in different scenarios.
And connects it to container services.
Mentions Amazon ECS, Elastic Container Service, in that context. How containers fit into these architectural patterns.
Okay. Now, the presenter apparently has a favorite chapter.
Yes. The chapter on Kubernetes. described as a Docker-based cluster management and orchestration platform.
Can't really talk modern cloud ops without talking Kubernetes.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And the book connected to the relevant AWS services.
Which would be EKS, Elastic Kubernetes Service.
Exactly. EKS for the Managed Kubernetes Control Plane, and also mentions EBS, Elastic Block Storage, for persistent storage with Kubernetes pods.
Covers compute and storage for K8s on AWS. Got it.
And there's an interesting note about terminology.
Oh.
The presenter points out how terms like namespaces in Kubernetes echo concepts from object-oriented programming.
Providing isolation and organization.
Yeah, the presenter even mentions the kubectl get namespaces command. It's like using folders to keep things separate and avoid conflicts, but for your cluster resources.
Nice analogy. Okay, nearing the end, the overview circles back to the flexibility of DevOps.
Right, emphasizing that the value comes from adapting these tools and principles to different operational needs. It's not rigid.
And for practical application.
The author apparently has related projects up on GitHub, so listeners, you can actually clone repos and play with the concept.
Hands-on learning, always good. Now here comes that surprising bit from the overview, the author's summary.
Yeah, this is where the presenter expresses, well, bafflement. At the end of Chapter 6, the big IAC chapter,
Yes.
the author apparently concludes by saying they doubt the reader will actually be able to write a complete IAC program after reading the chapter.
Wait, what? After a whole chapter explaining it with examples?
I know. The presenter's reaction is basically, that makes no sense.
It does sound odd, like teaching someone to drive and then saying, but you probably still can't drive.
Exactly. The presenter strongly disagrees, arguing a developer should be able to write at least a basic IAC script after reading a dedicated chapter. They hope the author maybe just meant, won't be an expert instantly.
Let's hope so. Okay, finally, just brief mentions of monitoring and security.
Yeah, the overview acknowledges they're covered significantly. Monitoring across processes with AWS examples and DevSecOps security integrated in.
With tools like AWS Wave, Security Hub, Trusted Advisor mentioned.
Correct. Showing security as part of the DevOps picture in the book.
Okay, so let's recap this deep dive into the YouTube overview of DevOps MIT AWS. We've seen how it tackles AWS basics, the shift in service models.
The core DevOps loop, the deep dive into infrastructure as code, even with that weird Chapter 6 ending note.
Right. Plus the emphasis on automation, testing, CI/CD with AWS tools like Code Pipeline.
And touching on Kubernetes with EKS, different architectures, and even security aspects.
So hopefully for you listening, this gives a really good feel for what the book covers, according to this overview, saving you some time, but hitting the key points on DevOps and AWS.
We got the condensed version, highlighting the scope, the interesting structural choices, and that slightly confusing authorial doubt at the end.
Indeed. And maybe a final thought to leave you with. Considering all this increasing sophistication in DevOps tools and the huge push for automation, how might this really change the game for development and operations teams? Not just the tasks they do, but the skills they need, how they collaborate, maybe even the team structures themselves.
Yeah, even if full automation is always just over the horizon, the way teams work and the expertise needed seems like it's constantly evolving because of these tools.
Definitely something to think about as the space continues to mature.